I've lived on this land longer than any of them have lived in this state. My name is Jeremiah Booker. I'm 82 years old, and this little patch of soil 5 acres, a crooked barn, a coop full of chickenses, all that's left of what used to be a thriving black farming community after the Jim Crow era. My daddy built the irrigation ditch with his bare hands. My mama planted the dogwood tree still blooming by the fence. Then came the new folks, young, rich, mostly white, chasing country peace they didn't understand. With them came rules. With the rules came HOA President Sandra Whitmore, draped in black blazers and fake authority, sending letters about unsightly lawn growth and unauthorized poultry enclosures. I ignored most of it until I saw it. Right by my fence line stood a glossy white sign, freshly staked into the ground like a knife. Future site of Rosewood Public Park, a community vision. And just like that, I knew. They weren't just trying to change the neighborhood. They were trying to erase me. They came at dawn, like thieves hiding behind laws. No letter, no hearing, no courtesy. Just the groan of heavy machinery and the crash of timber splitting against steel. I stepped outside to see the old cedar fence I built with my father when I was 15 being torn apart by a yellow bulldozer bearing the HOA seal. The boards, weathered but strong, scattered like bones across the grass. Sandra Whitmore stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, declaring the land abandoned public space. Beside her was a young police officer in crisp uniform, Officer Daniel Whitmore, her nephew, who told me this was part of a municipal revitalization plan. I asked to see a court order. He handed me a pamphlet. I didn't yell, didn't raise my hand. I just bent down and began gathering the broken pieces of wood, one by one. The neighbors watched, some whispering, some filming. They all missed the look in my eyes, steady, sharp, quiet as stone. They thought I was surrendering. But I was remembering. The night after the demolition, I couldn't sleep. The wind scraped against the window panes like fingernails. The porch creaked under its own weight. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that fence splintering all over again. But I wasn't angry. Not the kind that yells or breaks things. No, I was something worse. I was remembering. Just before dawn, I walked out to the old tool shed. Not the chicken coop or the seed barn. This one stood behind the pump house, rusted hinges and padlock long since frozen with age. Most folks in the neighborhood didn't even know it existed. The place looked abandoned from the outside. That was the point. Inside, I wiped dust from the shelves and opened a trunk wrapped in canvas. The metal groaned as I peeled it back. Inside were blueprints, handwritten ledgers, faded permits, and maps drawn in pencil, me father's handwriting, and mine beside it. You see, back in the 1960s, before the county brought their fancy infrastructure, this whole area was farmland, black-owned, mostly forgotten by the city. The government didn't care if we had power or water. So we built our own. My daddy dug the first trench. I ran the copper wire. We hauled stone from the river and built a pump house brick by brick. By the time I turned 23, I designed the entire independent water and power grid for Booker Hollow, using a deep-ground aquifer and a mini hydro turbine powered by the creek that still runs behind my field. For decades, it kept our farms alivers, and the few white farms that respected us enough to ask. But when the land got bought out, and the rich folks started moving in, they didn't bother to learn where their lights came from. The new development contracts made a deal with the city to assume public utilities, but the engineers never followed through. Too expensive to extend lines that far, they said. So instead, they quietly tapped into the old Booker grid. They thought it was abandoned, just another relic of the past. But I never signed it over. Every year, I filed the maintenance reports, paid the minimum tax, kept the paperwork in order. It wasn't nostalgia, it was protection. A promise to my father and every man who ever spilled sweat into that dirt. I'd be the last one to forget what they built. And now, the HOA had bulldozed my fence, claimed my land, and hosted ribbon cuttings with fake smiles while sipping water from my aquifer and charging their Teslas off the current running through my turbine. They didn't know, but they were about to. I sat down on an old milk crate, papers spread across my lap, and traced the original connection points: the main water valve that ran beneath the parkland they'd just claimed, and the electric junction hidden beneath the transformer box behind Lot 14. Everything was still there. Everything still ran through me. They could take my fence. They could lie with printed signs and phony permits. But they forgot who I am. I'm Jeremiah Booker. I designed the veins of this neighborhood with my bare hands. And if I decide the blood stops flowing tomorrow, well, they'll remember me then. They called it a celebration of progress. The HOA put out glossy invitations to every household in Rosewood Heights. There were white tents, catered lemonade, a string quartet playing near the park entrance. At the center of it all stood Sandra Whitmore, dressed in a powder blue pantsuit with a silk scarf draped around her neck like a banner of victory. Behind her, the brand new sign gleamed under the morning sun. Rosewood Community Park, a gift to the neighborhood. I stood in the back, near the sycamore tree they hadn't bothered to remove. My hands were stained with grease and soil. I hadn't changed clothes for the occasion. I didn't come to celebrate. I came with truth. Cameras flashed as Sandra lifted the ceremonial scissors, flanked by board members and a local news anchor. "This park," she declared, smiling wide for the crowd, "represents unity, vision, and the kind of neighborhood we can all be proud of." Applause followed, empty claps from people who didn't know any better. I stepped forward. "No, ma'am," I said, voice clear but low. "It represents theft." The applause stopped. A few heads turned. A few phones rose. Sandra's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed like drawn blinds. "Mr. Booker," she said sweetly, "you're welcome to enjoy the park like everyone else, but this isn't the time." "It is," I said, pulling out the folder tucked under my arm. "Because this," I held up the title deed, folded and yellowed with time, "says this land is still mine, and so does the registrar's stamp on the back." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And this," I flipped to another document, laminated and signed in 1963, "this outlines the original grid plan for water and electricity in this sector, every pipe, every line. My family installed them. My signature's still at the bottom." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is that true?" Sandra let out a soft, practiced laugh. "Jeremiah, I'm sure those old papers mean a lot to you, but let's not confuse nostalgia with legal standing. This land was reassigned by community vote and authorized through a city planning subcommittee." I stepped closer. "Then show me the city permit, the purchase receipt, the transfer agreement." Silence. Sandra's eyes flicked to her assistant, then to the news anchor, who was still filming. "You're just trying to create a scene," she snapped. "This is a day of joy. You're an old man, clinging to a dilapidated farm no one wants. What can you really do, Jeremiah?" I looked her in the eye, voice low and steady. "Come tomorrow, you'll see." And I walked away, no threats, no yelling. Just the quiet certainty of a man who still held the wires beneath their walls and the water beneath their feet. Behind me, the celebration tried to continue, but something had shifted. Conversations grew uneasy. Neighbors started asking questions. Sandra's smile wavered. One of the HOA board members leaned in to whisper something in her ear. She didn't like what she heard. Because I hadn't come to argue. I'd come to warn them. The lie they'd built their fences on was beginning to crack. And by sundown tomorrow, the truth would come rushing in like water through a broken pipe. At exactly 5:03 a.m., I put on my old denim shirt. The collar was frayed. The sleeves faded from years under sun and sweat. I buttoned it slow, steady, same way my daddy taught me to start every day. With intention. The house was quiet. No television. No phone. Just the low groan of the floorboards, and the wind rustling the corn stalks out back. I grabbed my toolbox, the small one with the brass latch, and walked out the back door toward the old turbine shed. The path curved behind the orchard and dipped low where the creek used to flood every spring. I could still hear my father's voice as we built Itham, calling out measurements, me holding the level with trembling teenage hands. We poured the concrete base by lantern light. That building 3 walls of cinder block and a sloped tin roof had outlived the city's promises, and every single real estate brochure claiming this land was undeveloped. They had no idea what was buried beneath their manicured lawns. I stepped inside. Dust hung thick in the air, dancing in the beam of my flashlight. The turbine still hummed with life, quiet, reliable, patient. Just like the land. In the far corner was the breaker panel. And just above it, the water valve junction. My father had marked each line with his own handwriting. North sector, irrigation. Reservoir reserve, residential. The last one fed directly into the subdivision now called Rosewood Heights. The same homes, whose owners voted to turn my land into a park. The same ones who watered their golf course lawns while filing noise complaints about my roosters. I stood in front of the panel for a long time. Then I opened the valve case, gripped the wheel, and turned it clockwise. The metal groaned in protest, stiff with age, but it moved. Clack. Click. Thud. Next, I flipped the first switch on the breaker. A low pop echoed as the current redirected, cutting power from the transformer box that fed the neighborhood's grid extension. It was done. I walked out into the rising sun, hands blackened with grease. A crow called from the trees as if it, too, had been waiting. At 6:42 a.m., the first homeowner noticed their water pressure was low. A man in khaki shorts tried to brush his teeth and watched the faucet wheeze out a sputter of brown. By 7:15, the Rosewood Heights Facebook group lit up. Anyone else have no water? No power in the upstairs bedroom. Can't charge my car. Toilets not flushing. Is this city maintenance? By 8:30, kids were late to school because no one could shower. Lawn sprinklers stopped mid-cycle. Irrigation systems shut down in the middle of a community garden tour. At exactly 9:02 a.m., Sandra Whitmore received her first call from the Rosewood Heights technical liaison, a man named Greg, who always spoke with polished calm. But not today. There's something wrong with the supply lines, he said. City's looking into it, but they're saying. He paused. They're saying this isn't their system. Sandra frowned. What do you mean not theirs? Greg cleared his throat. I mean the infrastructure isn't owned by the city. The water line, the grid extension, they're connected to a private source, registered back in 1965. According to the county, it's legally operated under the name Jeremiah Booker. Silence. Sandra's fingers tightened around the phone. That's impossible. That's an old man with chickens and a rotting barn. That can't be legal. Well, Greg continued carefully. It is. And he filed a notice of conditional service termination 6 weeks ago. It's all recorded. The city has no jurisdiction over it. If the easement terms were breached, he's within his rights. She didn't respond. Outside her window, the water station in the new park sat dry and useless. A golden retriever sniffed at the nozzle, confused. The fountains were silent. The community oasis had become a decorative sandbox. Her assistant burst into the room. Phones are ringing off the hook. Residents want answers. Some say he warned them, told them yesterday at the park. Sandra stood up, trembling with the sudden realization. This wasn't a threat. It was a fact. They thought they were dealing with a relic. But Jeremiah Booker still owned the heartbeat of this land. He wasn't forgotten. He wasn't powerless. He was the man they tried to erase. And now, every sink and socket reminded them. They couldn't. And tomorrow's coffee wouldn't brew until someone made it right. By noon, the silence was broken not by lawnmowers or dog walkers, but by microphones and camera crews. News vans rolled into Rosewood Heights like storm clouds. What started as a few disgruntled social media posts had become a full-blown crisis. And at the center of it all was a name no one expected to hear. Jeremiah Booker. A man most residents had ignored, now appeared on every screen in the county, standing in front of his quiet farm, wearing the same faded denim shirt, speaking calmly into the camera. This land, he said, holding up the deed, was never for sale, never abandoned, and certainly never theirs to steal. The media loved it. The story had all the ingredients: a powerful HOA, an elderly black landowner with historical roots, forged permits, and most damning of all, a deliberate misuse of public funds. That part came courtesy of Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter from the County Observer, who had started digging once word of the shutdown hit her desk. Within 48 hours, she uncovered a paper trail that traced HOA dues thousands of dollars in resident payments into a shell company registered under the name Rosewood Holdings LLC. It didn't take long to connect the dots. The LLC was run by a man named Eric Dalton, who also happened to be the lead developer on a project called Park Phase I. And Eric Dalton? He played golf every weekend with Sandra Whitmore's husband. The documents were clear. The community dog park was never meant to be permanent. It was simply a placeholder, a flashy distraction before rezoning hearings allowed them to quietly convert the land into luxury townhomes, complete with rooftop lounges and a members-only spa. Emails leaked from within the HOA board sealed the narrative. Once we get full control of Booker's land, we'll rename the whole block as Rosewood Villas. From Sandra Whitmore. Subject: Phase I. Strategy. He's old. He won't fight. Even if he tries, the press will never care about a rundown farm. From Board Treasurer Gail Meyer. They were wrong on both counts. By that evening, a group of younger residents, teachers, tech workers, even a few high schoolers home for summer organized an emergency community forum. They created flyers, opened a group chat, booked the church hall at the edge of the neighborhood, and sent out an invitation. Emergency meeting on park scandal. We deserve the truth. They invited the HOA. They invited the press. And most importantly, they invited Jeremiah. I wasn't sure I would go. Martha, me neighbor from 3 houses down, brought me the flyer in a trembling hand. You should speak, she said. Her voice half plea, half prayer. We need someone who remembers what this place used to be. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I stood at my back door that night, watching the last light fade behind the hills. The turbines still hummed quietly in the distance. And the farmy father's farm, my grandfather's dream, lay quiet and breathing. The community had forgotten me for a long time, ignored the history under their feet, but now they were listening. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to speak. When I walked into the church hall, every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. Some sat cross-legged on the floor. I didn't come in with lawyers or speeches. Just my boots, my documents, and the truth. The room fell silent as I took the mic. Not because I was loud, because I was the only one who wasn't yelling. I'm not here to punish anyone, I began. I'm not here for revenge. I held up the deed, then the blueprints. I'm here because 5 generations of my family worked this land, built systems when no one else would help us, fed neighbors who never asked our names, protected water and power lines while the rest of the world paved over its memory. I paused, scanning the room. And now, someone tried to take that away. Not through honest debate, not through legal purchase, but through lies, intimidation, and forged signatures. People murmured, shifting uncomfortably. You've all been paying dues to people who planned to sell your neighborhood from under you. Your lawns, your views, your trust turned into profit margins and champagne toasts. I looked at the young woman in the front row, notebook on her lap, eyes wide. You weren't just betrayed by Sandra Whitmore. You were betrayed by the silence we let fester. I stayed quiet too long, but no more. There was no applause. Just a heavy stillness, the kind that falls when truth settles into the corners of a room. Then someone stood. A young father. I didn't know, he said, voice cracking. But I believe you now. What can we do? That's when the firestorm truly began. Not of destruction, but of awakening. The next night, I returned to that same church hall, this time not as a rumor or a name in someone else's story, but as the man they had tried to erase. No introduction. No title. Just me, Jeremiah Booker. I wore the same denim shirt and work pants I'd worn that morning, still streaked with soil from checking the irrigation lines. My hands were stained, calloused, real. I didn't try to hide them. They were part of the truth I came to bring. The room was quieter than before, charged with something different now. A kind of hush that falls before a storm changes direction. I didn't take the podium. I just stood by the folding table at the front, laid down my documents one by one. A copy of the original deed, signed in 1947 by my grandfather. A blueprint of the turbine system, with my name scrawled in the lower corner beside my father's. And the 1965 infrastructure permit, the same one they'd forgotten, the same one still legally binding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just let the paper speak. The water in your bathtubs, the lights in your kitchen, the pipes that run under your dog park, I said. They don't belong to the city. They were built by hands like mine, long before the brochures promised you luxury country living. People shifted in their seats. Some stared at the floor. A few nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces falling into place. Then a woman stood, middle-aged, white, polite, but visibly shaken. "Why didn't you sue them?" she asked, genuinely. "Why not take them to court?" I looked at her a long moment, then answered quietly. "Because I don't need to win," I said. "I need them to remember." A pause. "This land holds memories older than any of your contracts. This farm fed people during droughts, gave water when no one else would, and stood through storms that wiped out whole counties. My family never asked to be heroes. We just asked to be left in peace." I picked up the blueprint again, ran my thumb across the faded edges. "But when they bulldozed my fence, they didn't just break wood. They broke memory. And when you break memory, when you decide someone like me doesn't belong, you're not just stealing land. You're trying to rewrite history." No one said a word. Not even the board members sitting stiffly in the back. "I'm not here to fight you," I finished. "I'm here to remind you. This land has roots, and not all of them grow in straight lines." A murmur of quiet agreement rippled through the crowd. By the time I stepped down, I didn't need applause. I didn't need pity. I had something far better. They listened. It didn't take long for the dam to break. The day after the community forum, the HOA board convened a meeting behind closed doors. But no one showed up. Not even their own secretary. By the end of the week, Sandra Whitmore had resigned, her statement cold and defensive, blaming misinformation and smear tactics. It didn't save her. Within days, county investigators launched a formal probe into fraudulent contracts and misuse of community funds. The emails, the LLC ties, the undeclared gifts, it was all there in black and white. The HOA crumbled like the fake politeness it had been built on. But something unexpected rose from the wreckage. The very people who had once crossed the street to avoid eye contact with me now stood at my gate asking how they could help. And so we began again. Not with bulldozers, but with shovels. They helped me replant the backfield, the one their dog park had torn up. Someone donated seeds. Someone else brought tools. Children came with small hands and big curiosity. They called me Mr. J, like it was the most natural name in the world. The old bench by the stream was cleaned and repaired, and when we held the small ceremony to reinstall the land marker that had once stood by my family's fence, we didn't use stone or steel. We used wood cut from the same grove my grandfather once tended and carved a single sentence into its grain. "Respect runs deeper than rules." The phrase wasn't mine. It came from a girl named Ellie, age 10, who had helped water tomato sprouts by my side and asked me one afternoon, "Mr. J, why didn't they respect your fence?" I told her, "Because some people see rules before they see people." She thought for a moment, then said softly, "But people come first." Yes, they do. Now, when I sit on that bench at dusk, the air is quiet, not silent from fear, but peaceful. The turbines still hum, the stream still runs, but the neighborhood has changed. No more anonymous letters. No more fake ordinances. No more signs promising luxury. Only hands digging, kids laughing, and neighbors who finally learned who really kept their lights on all these years. That park? It never opened again. No dogs ran its trails. No ribbon was cut. It stayed dark, abandoned by those who built it on deceit. The grass grew wild, and the fancy lights rusted in silence, a monument to arrogance undone by its own blindness. And as for me, I sit on that bench some evenings, watching the water catch the last light of day. I think of my father, of my mother's laughter while shelling peas, of my grandfather's hand, gripping a shovel like it was a promise. I smile, not because I won, but because they remembered. And as the stars come out and the porch lights flicker on, I whisper to myself with a slow, satisfied breath, you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes, you just turn off the water and cut the lights.